I'm Dean Humphreys. I have been in the world of sound, audio, mixing for 48 years. I'll give you a little bit of background about me. And the most important thing for me today is your careers, funnily enough, and how you want to progress your careers. So there are common themes, whether you want to go into music production, you want to go into sound engineering, editing, whatever. There are some absolute common themes that will pertain to you absolutely as much as it did to me nearly 48 years ago. So I was 16 and a half years old, and I was the third boy in the history of Surbiton Grammar School, which is now Esher College, to be expelled. I was in November 1974, I was in the headmaster, Mr. Eric Waller's office at Surbiton Grammar School, and it was the first time I'd heard the word ignominious, which is shameful and embarrassing. He said, it's an ignominious day for the school. I've been back through the records of the school since it started in 1919. In its 55-year history, you are only the third boy that we've had to permanently expel. And so with that, I then, all I'd ever want... Sorry? Because I did nothing. I just looked out of the window all the time. I failed all of my GCSEs apart from 2. I failed, I think, 8. I don't say this with any pride. I just failed, I think it was 8 or maybe 9. Some just with, like, completely failed. Just didn't bother. I only found out about 20 years ago upon meeting with my old PE teacher, a chap called John Whitlock. I saw him and I said, hi, and he said, oh, you were expelled. I said, yeah, and I obviously remember that bit. And he said, the reason you were kept on longer than you should have stayed on at Surbiton Grammar School, he said it was probably prolonged for 6 months because I represented the school in every sport that we did. I've always been incredibly sporty. I've always been very sort of athletic. I mean, I've enjoyed sport. And so I represented the school, and he said continually the headmaster was being told by a lot of the teachers, throw Humphreys out. And a lot of us sports teachers were saying, well, let's keep him for the rugby match, the football match, the swimming, the table tennis, and so my stay was extended a little bit. When I was 10 or 11 at primary school, I was asked what we all wanted to do when we grew up, and we had to write in our news books. It was at Oatlands County Primary School, and most of the people wrote they wanted to be a footballer or a doctor or a nurse, or the class weirdo wanted to be something like a marine biologist at the age of 10, but anyway. And I wrote down I wanted to be a dubbing mixer, and because I'd been to Twickenham Film Studios when I was about 9 or 10 or something, and I went into a mixing studio which was 10 times the size of this, and it was like a sort of a seismic religious moment. And I thought, oh my God, I think this is what I want to do. So when I got expelled, I went to Twickenham Film Studios, and this is where you lot sort of come in, so I'll get off me as quickly as possible. I started at Twickenham Film Studios in the sound department, and all I ever wanted to do was go into mixing. That's all I wanted to do. But I'm only 16 3/4, and in a time-honoured tradition there, I literally made all the teas, made the coffees, carried the film cans, got the newspapers, posted the letters, got, quite rightly at times, the occasional bollocking, sometimes got a bollocking when I didn't deserve it. And it was sort of watching all the people there and observing how the process of sound and all the component parts are sort of put together. The important thing for me is at any point whilst I'm talking now, and for the next hour and 3/4 or 2 hours, whatever it is, if there's anything you want to ask, don't just jump in. Let's not have the formality where there'll be probably moments when you think, well, I'd like to ask him about this, but now he's veered off somewhere else. Just jump in. So don't stand on ceremony. Just jump in if there's any questions you want to ask or whatever. And so your careers in the future upon leaving here will be so dependent on some of the sort of the following bits and pieces, which are fixed. So looking at some old person like me, I can actually in many ways look at you lot and know more or less how you feel and where you'd like to be, and how do I get an opportunity, how do I get a break, how do I launch myself into this industry that I've paid money at DBS to try and hopefully further my career. What do I do in order to maximise my chances of getting a job on the outside? And whether you're in music or film, many things are common themes. So the fact you may be talking about slightly different technology and how you record things and edit things and mix things in music is of course different from if you did it in TV or in film. But above and beyond that, there are some basic things that tie all this industry together. And the thing that kind of worked, well, did sort of work for me, and it pertains to you, especially now at the beginning of your career, is of course you'd like to get to the top and you want to become that famous record producer or engineer or whatever it is you want to do. But how do you actually get there? And of course impetuosity, which I was when I was 17, 18, 19, I was unbelievably impetuous. And Twickenham Film Studios, where I started, they had a 36 input Neve console. And I would spend all my spare time working out about frequencies and compressors and gates and limiters, and I knew all about the frequencies, and there's almost nothing I didn't know about this Neve console that we had. I knew absolutely everything about everything, high and low pass filters. And so what I did, I immersed myself, and I think there is potentially at times a danger that at the beginning of your career or the beginning of whether you're at DBS or whatever, in believing that the technology is the driving force. It isn't. I promise you it isn't. Because now we're talking about, plugins and all the latest technology, and we're talking about gates and expanders and DSs and attack times and release times and all that kind of stuff. That's a constant thing, but the technology is changing. What is the latest compressor today that everybody's raving about, and you have to use this sample or you have to use this particular microphone, is transitory. That's completely movable. So all the kind of plugins that, well, we didn't have plugins 45 years ago. We had Neve compressors, albeit that they're still here 45 years later. There are some things that stand the test of time. There are some things that are empirical. They'll be there in another 50 years' time. That's a fixed thing. And of course, there are marvelous plugins that try and emulate the Neve compressors and gates and what have you, but blah, blah, blah. So I lost myself in believing that the technology was everything known about the console. In the same way that a taxi driver needs to understand roughly what goes on under the bonnet in terms of valves and pistons and carburetors and spark plugs, having an idea as to what goes on under the bonnet is fantastic. Knowing roughly how a console works and how you get a signal in and how you get a signal out, you'll learn anyway. The key, which I didn't realise until I was lucky enough when I was about 19, when I was 20, I was running around all the time in the back room of the recording room at Twickenham Film Studios, and would occasionally go into the studio, as I said, when there was downtime, to learn about how the console worked. And immerse myself, and I was keen and I was exuberant and enthusiastic, and I would run around the studio running errands and happily making myself available for everybody. This is that's what you need to do, amongst many other things. That when you start at a place, if you get that opportunity to start at a studio or whatever it is in the world that you want to move into, you have to be engaged and love it. And it's an industry that is genuinely vocational. It is something that no money can recompense you for it. It's just something that's in your blood. If you get well paid, fantastic. It's just a thing that is in you, and it's always been in me. And I think in many ways, industries and people and companies can pick up on the fact of whether you genuinely are interested in that field. And you have to show at the beginning of your career that enthusiasm and drive and energy, even in moments when there's downtime or you're a bit bored with the people you're working with, or the producer or the drummer or the guitarist or the director or whatever. You've got to maintain at the beginning of your career far more energy and drive and commitment, and show it, than when you're of my age now, because I've kind of done it, all that kind of stuff. So learning about the technology, I would thought, and I'm in some ways I think I'm here to disavow you of the belief that the technology is everything. It's great, it's a component part. It's like a taxi driver knowing about what's going on under the bonnet. But it was brilliantly put to me on a film that I worked on when I was about 20, and I went into the mixing studio. It was the Wings, Paul McCartney's film, Wings Over America. And there was two men came in to sort of oversee the mix Paul McCartney had sent in. It was two people, a producer called Chris Thomas, who worked with the Pretenders and many, many other people. And there was a mixing engineer from Abbey Road called Phil McDonald. So I'm about 20. Chris Thomas was then be about 34, 5. Phil McDonald about the same. And in they come, and it's all very exciting because, you know, Paul McCartney's also going to come in at some point, and we were there for about 3 weeks on the film. And it was interesting bringing music people into the world of film and film sound mixing, because the film was all about the tour that Wings had done in America. And what was interesting is talking to Phil McDonald, who'd worked at Abbey Road on some of the later Beatles albums. And we were talking about technology. I was talking about, I don't know, something to do with reverbs or something boring. And he said, the job that I do as a recording engineer, and he used to work with, have you heard of Jeff Emerick? Of course, the Beatles engineer. He said, I used to work under Jeff Emerick. And Jeff Emerick, he said, yes, you know, he records stuff and mixes stuff. He said, but Jeff Emerick told me years ago, he said that the role of a mixing engineer is that it's analogous to being a taxi driver. And I thought, okay, how do you work this out? And he said, quite simply, you as the mixing engineer should instinctively know what a piece of equipment does. And he said, of course you want to sit there and you want to fiddle around and do all the kind of things that you need to do. So, and he said, and you have an understanding. The taxi driver has an understanding of what is going on under the bonnet. But the key to the success of the taxi driver and the recording engineer is how do you get the client, the passenger, from A to B? How do you take them on this, in the case of a taxi driver, a literal journey, in the case of a recording engineer, a metaphorical journey? How do you take that person who's going to be sitting next to you for 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a day consistently, and you keep them engaged? Now, you're obviously not going to be talking all the time about EQ and plugins and reverbs and panning and Dolby Atmos and all that kind of stuff. How do you keep Paul McCartney or George Martin, or in the case of my world, film directors who are sitting next to you, literally next to you, for weeks on end? You are not going to be sitting there saying, oh, by the way, I'm now adding 3 dB at 4K. They're not interested. They're really not interested. It's the same way that if you said to if you were a taxi driver, you hardly like to say to the passenger in the back, well, at the moment, I've just gone into 3rd gear and I've got the new radio, as you can see in here, and I'm using Michelin's tyres. Well, they presume you know roughly how to drive a car. Why would you be talking about boring banalities? And much of the job that I do is nothing to do with saying, oh, by the way, I'm now going to do something magical with an EQ. I'm going to put a plug-in that nobody's ever heard of. They're not interested. They just presume you're going to do something that's going to make it sound better or different. And then the key to this, going back to you lot, is how do you get into that position of having, you know, because you all want to do it. You all want to be that engineer, producer, editor, or whatever. How do you maximize your prospects of getting into that world? And I've taught at 25, 30 universities to people who want to break into that world of media. Let's call it film, TV, music. If I refer to film, I mean music. If I say music, I mean film, and it's all the same thing. But how do you maximize your opportunities that are being presented by companies like DBS, and who will show you how, you know, get a signal in and a signal out and this tape machine, and how, and bringing eminent people in from the world of music and what have you, telling you about how they sample, edit, mix, record, all that kind of stuff. All very illuminating, fantastic. But how do you get to that position where you are in charge or you're running the show? And I would contend it's reliant upon, it's really boring stuff. I used to run a company, a post-production company, sound post-production company, for 10 years. And I would get, it'd always be around January of the year that people were graduating, emails saying, you know, please can I come and get work experience? Can I work for your company and all that kind of stuff? And because they're obviously quite understandably looking for a job, they want to break, they want to get in as an intern, an apprentice. And about 5 years ago, I was invited. I was one of 5 industry people. There was an animator, there was a music producer, a cameraman, and somebody else. 5 of us on a panel invited by Southampton University to go and talk to students who were going to graduate. How do they get into the industry? And I'm sitting there, and there's about 90 students out there, and one of the industry people said to the students, as soon as I get an email from somebody, a CV, cover letter from somebody from a college, university wanting to come and work for me, as soon as I see a spelling, punctuation, grammar mistake, I immediately delete it. At which point, the four of us on the panel who all employed people turned to him and said, that's what I do. Now, the person who'd invited us from Southampton University, us five, who'd never met one another before, he said to his students, now it's really interesting, 5 people from industry who employ students out of colleges and what have you, who've never met, have said exactly the same thing. They delete CVs and cover letters. I used to do it endlessly. I'd go, oh God, they can't even, they can't even spell my name properly. They don't know the name of the company I'm working for properly. They haven't spelled that properly. It's just laid out appallingly. The spelling, punctuation, grammar mistakes. And so, as boring as it may sound, and of course it's wonderful to know about all this technology and equipment, that becomes almost, when applying for a job, almost redundant, because the people you're going to apply to, recording studios or whoever they are going to presume you've heard of a Neve compressor or a sampler or a Studer. That bit they just presume. It's the same way going back to the taxi driver. You just presume they know where first and second gear is. Surely if they're driving a car or want to drive the car, they're going to know how the thing works. Now the key is, how do you make yourself desirable enough in the eyes of a prospective employer who's going to take you on for a day, a week or month? And it is based on, have you got a really good CV? Above and beyond putting on your CV cover letter that, yes, I've been at DBS, I've worked on Neve consoles, I've worked with Ableton, I've worked with Pro Tools, I've worked with Logic, I've seen demos about Atmos. What makes you more employable than the next person who's just sent in a CV? And it is stuff like, which is invaluable. And you're talking to somebody who would literally go through, on average, 300 emails a year from people saying, can I come work with you? And I would look at it, yes, it's fantastic. They get a first or a 2-1 or whatever it is. They get their certificate. And I can see that they've spent time and money, which is obviously a really good indicator that you want to go into this world, that you've spent time and money at DBS or whatever. But how do I differentiate? How do I distinguish and determine as to why I should bring this person along for an interview and not this person? Well, as I've just said, on a cover letter CV, if it's not laid out properly, that's gone. But now you're down to maybe 10% of the people. How do I determine those 10% that come in? And I would easily contend a huge amount of prospective employers are doing what they're doing. I mean, I just do it anyway, and I know, and I've spoken to loads of people. They'll look the fact, yes, fantastic, I've been to DBS and I've had experience with Neve and all these equipment, fantastic. Not, in some ways, I'm not interested. The fact that you've gone there shows me you're interested in the world and you've committed time and money, which is invaluable. But what is it that's going to make me say, yeah, come along for a day or a week or whatever? And it's things like, what have you done outside of the place of learning? What have you gone and done and shown initiative and drive and impetus above and beyond the stuff that you're going to be given here to do? Yeah, well, fantastic, I did stuff at DBS. Well, of course, if you go to university, they're going to give you a project or a module to do. That's part of the curriculum. What have you got up off of your arse and gone and done something? Now that is really important in the eyes of a prospective employer. Have you worked at a shop, a club, a bar? Are you part of a team? Because what you're trying to build up as a prospective employer is a picture of somebody who is a literal metaphorical team player, because so much of this industry is absolutely and fundamentally reliant upon you being able to work with other people. And people say, oh yeah, working with other people. You go, yeah, well, it's great. And I'm at DBS or whatever, and we're all fine, we're all the same age, and we're all pretty cool, and we're just having a lot of fun, which is fabulous. It's it's marvelous. The big jump is, which no college, no place of learning can replicate, is when you go into the outside world when there's incoming fire. So the producers being difficult, the equipment's all blown up, you've got a deadline to hit. You really don't like, the director, which I've mixed over 190 movies. There's only about 6 I actually like. So it's about 184 people I actually don't like, or they're on a continuum. I just go, I really am just not interested in them. But I'm with them for 6, 7, 8 weeks. And I disagree with them. And half the time they're stoned, or they're stoned and drunk, or they're stoned, drunk and confused and they've got mental problems. And you just go, well, they're paying the wages. I could go off on one, but I'm now going to lose work. So you ride it. PR, diplomacy, the ability to be able to practice. You should practice at home. Just practice doing that. And get in front of the mirror and just practice for about a day, just doing that when you're being insulted, you've been told you're a moron, you don't know about the equipment, my God, I want to go to another studio, the last engineer I worked with knew far more than you do. Can you ride it? And a massive degree at times, of fortitude, backbone, resolve, whatever you want to call it, will be fundamental to your careers. Because whilst everybody's in here and you're working on a project and said, oh, we've spent 4 hours listening to this snare drum, and should we change the compression time and the compression and the attack times and the release and the hold and the transients, let's talk about the transients for a day and all that. In the real world, that's nonsense. It's not, learn about it, fantastic. The same way that when I was at Twickenham Studios with the Neve console, I would be in there for 4 hours fiddling around with an EQ because nobody's on my case. In the commercial world, well, they said it's got to be, it's got to be done by 6. I've worked on loads of things. You'd be working on something at 3 o'clock. It's on the BBC at 4:30, and they're going, go. Well, hold on. I'm not now going to say, yes, well, hold on. I need to look at my frequencies and my plugins and what have you. No, sometimes the art goes completely out the window. So that's something that can't be replicated in a place of education. You can run modules that are sort of roughly simulating industry protocols, but you haven't got a whole chain of people who are now shouting and screaming. The person that's in charge is being irascible and rude and difficult. So when you leave here, and in order to get out of here and get into that world, you've got to make yourself presentable. This is a absolutely true story. About 10 years ago, I was given this massive contract, an ITV series I was going to edit and mix and all that kind of stuff. Big TV series. And just a week before I was given it, I was asked to go and talk at Bournemouth University to 26 students who all wanted to go into the world of sound, music, let's just call it sound. Whether it's to do with theatre, sound. So I went to talk about sound. And I spoke to the 26, all of whom wanted to graduate and go into that world. About a week later, I got this contract to do this thing for 9 months. I thought, great. And we were looking to employ 2 people for the duration of the 9 months to take on as trainees, people who wanted to go into that world. And it was a great way to get them in. They can then get an IMDb credit, and it gets them underway and it gets them on the map. And we interviewed, I said to the man who ran the course, over the next 26 days, I'm more than happy to interview all 26 people. I'll have them in from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, and we'll just sort of see kind of what they're like. And at the end, we'll ideally like to take on 2 people. We may take on 2, we may not, but very generous, he said, very kind of you. Out of the 26, I think about 18 decided to take up this option to come and work with us for a day at Twickenham Film Studios. They had to be there at 9, finish at 6, that was it. We weren't going to give them anything major to do. We just kind of want to see what they're like. And that's what people are doing with you lot. They're kind of seeing, can we work with them? We interviewed 18 people over 18 days. We then took on 2 people, which was great, and they were brilliant for 9 months. Our choice, we were lucky, maybe skillful, doesn't matter, in choosing 2 people who were beyond exemplary for 9 months. Every single day they were brilliant. The key to this is that we had various people, we had about 3 or 4 who would turn up to the interview, well, for the day with us, like 9:15. So we said, well, no, the start time's 9. You'd expect to be there at least quarter to 9, but that's by the by. So immediately they've gone. So they've culled themselves. Other people would come in looking like tramps, and you think, well, they've gone. We had one guy come in, he arrived at about 10, so immediately he's gone. He came in, he looked, I swear to God, as though he hadn't washed for 2 or 3 weeks and changed his clothes for 2 or 3 weeks. Came in and said to my partner and I, the 2 of us ran the company, he said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm late, went to a party last night, told us all about how he got stoned or drunk or in a fight, I can't remember. So we're just thinking, well, why are you telling us this? It's not interesting. And then he says to my partner and I, as he's sitting down, could either of you make me a cup of tea? He said, because I'm a bit thirsty. And I said, yeah, certainly, would you like milk or, sugar? Oh, yeah, great. He said, yeah, I'm a bit thirsty. I said, yeah, sure. Now, When I called the head of the course to say that we chose on 2 out of the 18 or whatever, I told him about this student who'd asked for a cup of tea, and he said, "Oh, really? What was his name?" I said, "What was his name?" Oh, he said, "No, but he's a very good student. He's done very well in his exams, and he's probably going to get a first or a 2-1 or whatever." I said, "But this is really interesting." I said, "You are there of the belief that purely and simply because this person might know about a fade or a knob or a frequency or a sample rate or something, if that is your sole criteria for running a course, then the course is terrible." I'll name the man who ran the course, a man called Dr. Stephen Deutsch. And I said, "But Stephen, the course is terrible." I said, "If you are of the belief that purely and simply it says, oh, it's to do with that and a frequency and a knob, you're not doing them, you're not doing yourself and the course and the students justice." So what I'm trying to say is that so much of what will be necessary for you is to have the ability to go along to an interview and talk to somebody with enthusiasm who might take you for a day or a week or is just looking for people. Do you know about that company? Conversation, and when you go into somewhere, of course, you're all going to be really nervous. Anybody that goes into an interview and isn't nervous is mental. You're going to go in because you might be one of 5, maybe one of 10. You don't know, you could be one of 40 people. You want to be on your best behaviour, and you're nervous. When do you speak? When do I not speak? But there are things you need to do. You need to be able to make, and it sounds, you need to be able to make eye contact with people. So there's nothing worse. We had a couple of people that came along for various interviews and would be sort of looking at the floor. Yeah, because they're nervous, I get it. But you've got to make eye contact because this industry absolutely relies upon you, and especially at the beginning of your careers when you are just going in and out, making the teas and the coffees and carrying the cans and doing stuff with tape and what have you. At the beginning, your presence in a company is vital because you're going to be doing, as a generalisation, the relatively menial stuff. You might find it really boring. Oh God, not another copy of a tape or whatever, or a hard disk drive or a backup. Not interesting, but that is for the company, is to do with the perception of who you as a company are. So I want people around me that are lively, will come in and say, would anybody like tea or a sandwich, or anybody like me to park their car, or whatever it is. And so to make yourself available and enthused, even when you're thinking, oh God, what a boring day, we don't like the director or the producer or the drum or whoever it is. A lot of this industry is bluff, and it's bullshit. And it's knowing how to play the game. And I've sat there for years of my life sitting with people that you, as I've said earlier, you may disagree with. They may start in saying, yes, I think you need this frequency. And you think, well, the director, you've now just heard the word frequency or plug-in or pre-delay or decay time. You're now getting on the bandwagon because you're an inadequate fool. Okay, let's play the game. Let's extend the decay time, right? How's that for you? Is it better? They haven't heard decay time until 5 minutes before. So much of what you're going to do at the beginning and much of it at the end is to do, in fact, it's not to do with that and all this stuff. That's peripheral. Are you any good at dealing with people? And this goes back to when you put on a CV and cover letter. If you've worked at a supermarket, a pub, a bar, you're part of a team, that, in the eyes of an employer, I would easily contend is possibly more important than anything else, because they need to see that you are collaborative, you understand about opening that shop on time, tallying the money at the end of the day, working with difficult customers in a restaurant or a pub or a bar or on the checkout at Waitrose. All that kind of stuff is absolutely fundamental. You're not going to leave here and go, I think I'm the only person that's on a music course in Britain that knows all about sample rates and equipment stuff. You ain't. So how are you going to be able to differentiate yourself? You can't go in and say, well, excuse me, I'm the only person who knows about Neve release times. No, everybody knows about them. Not interesting. And are you a team player? So that, at the beginning, when you're trying to get in, you've got to make sure your CV and cover letter is nailed on. And the priority is not to put at the top the fact that you've got your diploma, your first 2-1, whatever it is. It's a constituent part and an essential and fundamental constituent part. But that isn't the most important thing. Employers are looking for, are you a team player? What can I see in this? What can I read in this that says, they're going to prove to be reliable. And this whole thing about timekeeping, it's boring. You've probably had people in already said, yeah, timekeeping, I don't know, but maybe I'm the 87th person to say you timekeeping. That is, to its very core, it's not just, oh, well, you know, now and again I'll be on time. Certainly in the world of film, if you consider there's 100 people on a film on a production set, in post-production any given time, even if there's only a few, there's just in sound and sound mixing, there's 18, 20 of you. So when you start at 8:30 in the morning, you start at 8:30. You don't sort of say, well, we'll roughly start at 10 to 9, because that mixing studio is about £800 an hour. So for every 15 minutes late, you've just got, the producer has just thrown, or the production company's got 200 quid and chucked it in the bin because you ain't ready to start and you're not working at 8:30, or some studios start at 9. So you have a responsibility to everybody else, because you are one of the constituent parts of this thing. And this laissez-faire attitude that I think sometimes people have of the industry from the outside looking in and saying, oh, it's all kind of loose and free. 95% of the time it isn't. It's absolutely, you turn up on time. Even if you start at 8:30, I would always be, and anybody else would be there, at the very least half an hour before the official start time. That is, it's an absolute given. And you haven't got the latitude at the beginning of your careers to say, well, I'll just sort of, I'll wander a little bit late, doesn't matter, I'm a bit late, the bus was a bit late. Get the bus that's going to get you in 2 buses early. Because at the beginning, look, I won't bore you with the amount of people I know have been, you know, stories of people being fired or got rid of, 18, 19, 20, 22-year-olds, 23-year-olds, because, yeah, they were on time 4 days a week, but then it was always 1 day a week, they'd be a bit like, gone, you're gone, you are finished. They can't carry you. And especially when you've got a company, a small, tight company, and you're relying upon the person to come in, the young trainee to come in and say to everybody, good morning, does anybody want a sandwich, a coffee or whatever? Because I don't want to be doing it. I'm sitting with the client, the director, the producer who's paying us all this money. I expect somebody to be there, to be running the errands. And that is a fundamental part. It's not particularly glamorous, but it's an essential part.